Starting our bulletin with the top story coming in from Russia, where the police have detained Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny minutes after he returned from Germany. Navalny was detained by the Russian police at a Moscow airport shortly after he landed on a flight from Berlin. Navalny returned home for the first time since his poisoning incident last summer, and before he had formally entered Russia, 4 masked police officers asked him to accompany them at passport control without explaining any reason. Russia's prison service had said that he faces immediate arrest once he returns. Yet he vowed to return to Russia in defiance of warnings that he faces imminent arrest. Navalny spokesperson Kira Yarmish confirmed he had been detained, saying on Twitter that Alexei was taken away by the police officers at the border with no explanation given whatsoever. Before his detention, Navalny spoke about the threat, saying that the air safety of a huge, beautiful city is under threat for someone Putin said nobody needs.
В первую очередь, конечно, хотел бы извиниться перед пассажирами этого рейса и перед теми людьми, я так понимаю, сотни людей пострадали от того, что был закрыт аэропорт Внуково. Тысячи людей, видимо, застряли из-за того, что просто перекрыли автодорогу во Внуково. Здесь ограничили движение. Ну, это просто еще раз показывает то, что происходит в России, и показывает абсолютную правильность. Я не могу сказать, что это мой выбор. Не то, что я выбирал, возвращаться или не возвращаться. Такой вопрос не стоял вообще ни одну секунду. Но это показывает о том, как нужно здесь бороться. Потому что, Господи, Боже мой, это же не просто власть каких-то отвратительных воров, но и совершенно ничтожных людей, которые занимаются какой-то ерундой. Они действительно поставили авиационную безопасность огромного прекрасного города под угрозу. Просто зачем? Для того, чтобы, как там Путин сказал, да кому он нужен?
The police in Moscow also arrested a number of supporters of Navalny as they awaited his arrival at the city's airport. There was a heavy police presence as crowds gathered outside the airport ahead of Navalny touching down in the city. Alexei Navalny's wife, Yulia Navalnaya, has called on supporters, asking them not to be afraid. It also may reignite political pressure on the West to tighten sanctions on Russia. Navalny's detention also prompted an immediate critique from the European Union and calls for the EU sanctions to be restored against Russia by Lithuania. The US joined the European Union in condemning the move, with State Secretary Pompeo saying that Navalny is not the problem. We demand his immediate and unconditional release. Mike Pompeo addressed the arrest through Twitter, saying that confident political leaders do not fear competing voices, nor see the need to commit violence against or wrongfully detain political opponents. Navalny recovered in Germany after he was poisoned last summer by what German military tests showed was a Novichok nerve agent. Now, WION's correspondent Stuart Smith is with us live from Moscow for more on this story. Stuart, thanks so much for joining us on WION. Now, tell us the latest on Alexei Navalny's detention. What do we know so far?
He is still in detention in Moscow. He's being held by the Federal Prison Service, which are the people who are charging him with breaking his bail conditions. This relates to a charge back in 2014 for which he was found guilty relating to fraud and corruption. He says those charges are politically motivated. The Federal Prison Service says by going to Germany, he broke his bail conditions, and that's why they are detaining him now. But early this morning, we heard his lawyer had tried to get in contact with him overnight, but the lawyer was denied access to speak with him. It was a big surprise when he arrived yesterday. His supporters had come out to support him at Moscow's southern airport. Riot police and the media joined the supporters, hundreds of them in the arrivals terminal. Perhaps because of that, his flight was diverted away from that airport, and in the end he landed at a Moscow airport in the north. But it was no surprise to anybody that he was arrested. There was a warrant out for his arrest based on these charges, and so he knew that it was coming. The question will be whether the Kremlin, or the question was, would the Kremlin arrest him and potentially provoke a lot of anger, a lot of discontent amongst his supporters, or would they let him go? But then the Russian state could end up looking quite weak and afraid of Navalny. As we saw yesterday, they chose to arrest him. What happens next, we're not sure.
Right. Now, Stuart, we know that he has been detained without any explanation, but the prison sentence that was held against him for embezzlement charges. So what kind of legal course will this take, and what happens to his political ambitions?
Well, in terms of the legal course, It depends whether the government and the prison service decide this is the charge they would like to try and pin on him. There is an argument that he says he was unable to fulfill his bail conditions because he was seeking medical treatment, and that could be one argument that his lawyers put across for why he broke his bail conditions, and potentially they could look favourably upon that. But honestly, if the Kremlin don't want him to be released, then he won't be. They will find charges. He has other investigations pending against him relating to corruption and his anti-corruption agency. In terms of his political ambitions, he tried to become Moscow mayor a few years ago. That failed, he says, because the vote was rigged, but he did receive around 30% of the vote, hence why he's seen as quite a significant threat as far as opposition figures go in Russia. In terms of future political ambitions, there is a general election coming up in September of this year. He himself is barred because of these criminal charges against him, but his political party are most well known not for succeeding themselves, but for joining other opposition to get opposition leaders against President Putin's political party, bringing them together to try and create the most likely opposition to have an effect in the regions or Moscow to try and unseat President Putin's party members.
Right. My final question, Stuart. The US and the EU have condemned the move and called for Navalny's immediate release. Will any of this deter Russian President Vladimir Putin?
It's unlikely it will, and as well as leaders, Amnesty International are calling this a politically motivated detention. But really, Russia expects nothing else from the West, and in fact they believe, well, the Russian government says it believes, that Alexei Navalny is a Western agent designed to destabilize Russia. So it will come as no surprise to either the government or Alexei Navalny's detractors that Western governments have come out and condemned this move.
Right. All right, Stuart, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.